Ibn Battuta, born in Tangier in 1304, one of history's greatest explorers, having traveled over 75,000 miles across continents, from North Africa all the way to China, a journey that surpassed even the great Marco Polo. His journeys, which lasted nearly 3 decades, are meticulously documented in his master work, the Rihla, or the Journey in our tongue, which offers a vivid panorama of 14th century cultures, governance, and religious practices. This detailed account provides invaluable insights into the Islamic world during the medieval period, and it marks him as a pivotal figure for scholars and history enthusiasts alike. Hello, welcome to the channel. Are you new here? Welcome. If you're coming back, it's good to see you again. If you like what I do and like to support the channel, link to the Patreon is in the bio. Otherwise, help YouTube push my video out to a broader audience by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Now with that out of the way, please make yourself relaxed, and we can begin our biography of Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta, born on the 24th of February 304 in Tangier, Morocco, during the Marinid dynasty, coming from a family of Islamic legal scholars, or Qadis as they're called, deeply rooted in the Berber tribe known as the Lawata. His early life was steeped in the religious and judicial traditions of his community, which adhered to the Sunni Maliki school of Islamic jurisprudence. This school was the predominant form of education and religious practice in North Africa during the time. Given his background and the traditions of his family, it was natural for Ibn Battuta to be requested to serve as a religious judge by his fellow Maliki Muslims, reflecting his deep engagement with the legal and also religious fabric of the society. On June 14th, 1325, he was at the age of 21, and he embarked on his first significant journey, a journey that many Muslims had taken, a pilgrimage to Mecca. In Islam, this is known as the Hajj. This marked the beginning of a vast exploration that would not see him return to his native Morocco for another 24 years. Setting out from his hometown, he expressed a profound personal drive and a long-held aspiration to visit the revered holy sites, feeling a compelling urge that overpowered all other considerations. Despite the deep sorrow of leaving his family behind, his desire for adventure and knowledge about distant lands pushed him to take this journey alone, without the company of fellow travelers or the security of a caravan. What we have here is a section from his diary about this early days, writing about the prospect of a lone journey. Let me read it. I set out alone, having neither fellow traveler in whose companionship I might find cheer, nor caravan whose part I might join, but swayed by an overmastering impulse within me, and a desire long cherished in my bosom to visit these illustrious sanctuaries. So I braced my resolution to quit my dear ones, female and male, and forsook my home as birds forsake their nests. My parents, being yet in the bonds of life, it weighed sorely upon me to part from them, and both they and I were afflicted with sorrow at this separation. End of passage. Ibn Battuta's route initially took him across North Africa's coastline, passing through regions ruled by the Abd al-Wadid and Hafsid dynasties. His journey led him further on, through the cities like Tlemcen, Béjaïa, and Tunis, where he paused for 2 months. Of course, the path was fraught with risks, primarily from bandits, which typically encouraged travelers to move in caravans for safety in numbers, although most of the time this didn't help much. During his stop in Sfax, he married, briefly, a union that ended quite quickly due to familial disputes. Back on the road again. This marriage was the first among several that punctuated his travels, because what's a vacation without a love story, albeit cut somewhat short? Moving on to the spring of 1326, after traversing over 3,500 kilometers, Ibn Battuta reached Alexandria, a significant port within the Bahri Mamluk Sultanate. There, he met Sheikh Burhanuddin and Sheikh Murshidi, 2 pious ascetics who recognized his deep-seated wanderlust. Burhanuddin notably predicted Ibn Battuta's future as a globetrotter, urging him to visit his brothers in India, Sind, and China, and deliver his salutations. After spending several weeks exploring Alexandria, Ibn Battuta proceeded to Cairo, the Mamluk Sultanate capital, and he stayed there for about a month. Choosing the road less traveled to Mecca, he headed towards the Red Sea port of Aidhab. However, a local rebellion at Aidhab forced him to retreat back to Cairo, where he decided to take a detour to Damascus, that's in modern-day Syria, guided by a prophecy that he would only reach Mecca if he went via the Syrian route. This route through Damascus also allowed him to visit significant religious sites, including Hebron, Jerusalem, and Bethlehem, safely managed by the Mamluk authorities to protect pilgrims. After observing Ramadan in Damascus, he joined a caravan that took him to Medina, home of the Mosque of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Spending 4 days in Medina, he continued on to Mecca, the holy city, where he finally fulfilled the rites of Hajj in November, thus attaining the title of El-Hajji. But even with his pilgrimage completed, his wanderlust was not yet sated. He'd gained quite a taste for being on the road, and there was such a big world out there to see, don't you think? He decided to opt against returning home, and he set his sights on the Khanate in the northeast. Onward. Now on November 17th, 1326, he departed from Mecca after spending a month in the holy city. He then joined a substantial caravan of pilgrims who were making their way back to Iraq, who took him in as one of their own. The journey took them north to Medina, and then across the Najd plateau of Najaf. That was a 2-week journey undertaken primarily under the cover of night. In Najaf, Ibn Battuta paid his respects at the mausoleum of Ali, the revered fourth caliph. Choosing to leave the main caravan, which continued towards Baghdad, Ibn embarked on a 6-month detour that would take him deeper into the landscapes of Iran. His travels led him from Najaf to Wasit, and then along the Tigris River towards Basra. His journey continued across the rugged terrain of the Zagros Mountains to Isfahan, the Iranian city of many great temples and ancient cultures. You can still find some Zoroastrian temples in Isfahan as well. Quite fascinating. From there, he ventured south to Shiraz, a bustling city that had remarkably escaped the devastation that the Mongol invasions had brought upon many other northern towns, and indeed, just like Isfahan, Shiraz is still there, going strong. Now, after his time in Shiraz, he crossed back over the mountains, reaching Baghdad finally in June of 1327. But the situation in Baghdad, if you know a little bit about the Mongols, was a little different. Not quite like the peaceful times to be had in Shiraz. No, it was a city still marked by the scars of Hulagu Khan's destructive assault in 1258. Indeed, they were still recovering, and the breadth of the devastation would indeed need a lot more time to recover. Now in Baghdad, he encountered one named Abu Sa'id, the last Mongol ruler of the unified Ilkhanate, who was preparing to leave the city with a rather large entourage. Ibn joined this royal caravan for a time, traveling with the man himself, Abu Sa'id, before diverting northwards on the Silk Road towards Tabriz. Now, Tabriz was important because at the time it was a significant commercial hub and the first major city in the region to have welcomed the Mongols and a center of trade. Its importance magnified by the destruction of nearby rival cities by the Mongols. So it was, I guess, pretty intelligent foresight to invite the Mongols in. Now, after a short period, Ibn left Baghdad once more in what was probably July, taking that northern route along the Tigris River. He visited Mosul, where he was hosted by the Ilkhanate governor. Then, his travels took him to the towns of Sitre and Mardin, that's near modern-day Turkey. Near Sinjar, he encountered a Kurdish mystic who bestowed upon him some silver coins. Returning to Mosul, he joined a feeder caravan of pilgrims, heading back to Baghdad to converge with the main caravan that was destined for Mecca. Now, he was facing some illness at the time, and this didn't help when you're out in the middle of the desert, traveling along those long, hot roads. But he managed to complete his journey back to Baghdad, just in time to rest up for his second Hajj. Ibn spent a significant period in Mecca following this pilgrimage, possibly remaining there from September 1327 until the autumn of 1330, although the exact chronology is somewhat of a debate. After completing either the 1328 or the 1330 Hajj, he traveled to Jeddah on the Red Sea coast From there, he made rather slow progress against challenging winds along the coast in a series of small boats called jalbas. His voyage finally led him to Yemen, where he visited Zabid and later Taiz. It was there where he met Malik Mujahidid Nur al-Din Ali of the Rasulid dynasty. Now, while he mentions a visit to Sana'a, it is uncertain if he ever went there. More likely, he traveled directly from Taiz to the vital trading port of Aden, arriving around the start of 1329 or 1331. Oh, and Aden was a huge port. From this bustling port, he finally set sail to Zayla on the Somali coast, dedicating about a week to explore this and other locations among the Somali seabed, such as Cape Guardafui. His journey through the region, often referred to in medieval Arabic texts as the land of the Berbers, or in their tongue, Balad al-Barba, soon brought him to Mogadishu in 1332. And yes, that is indeed the modern city of Mogadishu. At that time, Mogadishu was the place to be in sub-Saharan Africa, a flourishing city, a hub of commerce and craftsmanship, widely renowned for its high-quality fabric that found its markets as far away as Egypt. He found Mogadishu under the rule of the Somali Sultan, Abu Bakr ibn Sheikh Umar, whom he described as a dark-skinned man, proficient in both his native Somali and Arabic. The Sultan's court was a bustling hierarchy of officials, including ministers, legal experts, military commanders, and of course, a large team of royal eunuchs, all poised to serve at his command. Continuing his voyage, he sailed south to the Swahili coast, known to the Arabs as the land of the Zanj, Bilad al-Zanj. He made a brief overnight stop at the island town of Mombasa, that's in modern-day Kenya, which, though small at the time, was noted for its significance in later centuries. His travels then took him to Kilwa, in present-day Tanzania, a pivotal center of the gold trade. Kilwa impressed him with its architectural beauty and the extensive use of wood and reeds in its construction. He described it as one of the finest and most beautifully built towns. Glowing recommendation. While in Kilwa, he visited the court of Sultan al-Hasan ibn Sulayman, a descendant of the legendary Ali ibn al-Hasan Shirazi. I know, the Arabic names are a little bit long. I'm doing my best with them. He praised the Sultan's humility and piety, and noted their well-planned city, attributing its prosperity to such organization and good leadership. He then recorded significant architectural endeavors during the time, including the construction of the Husuni Kubwa Palace and the expansion of the Great Mosque of Kilwa, which was crafted from coral stones and noted for being the largest mosque of its kind. After his time on the Swahili coast, he awaited the monsoon winds to carry him back to Arabia. He returned via Oman and the Strait of Hormuz, eventually reaching Mecca to perform the Hajj of 330, or perhaps 332. Well, This was his third pilgrimage to Mecca. You think you'd get tired of it after a while. I've been to Tokyo 3 times, and I think it's the most boring city. Well, I suppose we have different motivations. Well, after his third pilgrimage, he was driven by a desire to serve under the Sultan of Delhi, Muhammad bin Tughlaq. In the autumn of 1330, or perhaps 1332, he embarked on his journey, deciding on an overland route to India that would first take him through the Seljuk-controlled territory of Anatolia. That's modern-day Turkey. His route began with a crossing of the Red Sea and the Eastern Desert, leading him to the Nile Valley before he turned north to Cairo. From there, he traversed the Sinai Peninsula, reaching Palestine and retracing some of the paths he had traveled in 1326. He continued north to the Syrian port of Latakia, where he boarded a Genoese vessel that transported him and his companions to Alanya on the southern coast of modern-day Turkey. From Alanya, he journeyed westward along the coast to Antalya, where he encountered members of a Fityan association. These semi-religious associations, composed of young artisans and headed by a leader known as an akil, were dedicated to welcoming travelers, and were present in most Anatolian towns during the 13th and 14th centuries. Ibn was profoundly impressed by the hospitality he received, and would later stay in their hospices in over 25 towns across Anatolia. His travels then took him inland to Agirda, the capital of the Hamidids, where he spent Ramadan in June 1331, or perhaps May 1333. Chronologies here are a little confusing. His account of his travels through Anatolia in his Rihla is notably confusing, with descriptions of his westward journey from Agirdir to Milas, followed by a sudden 420-kilometer eastward leap past Agirdir to Konya, and then continuing east to Erzurum, before inexplicably skipping back 1,160 kilometers to Birgi. Historians speculate that while Ibn visited many towns in central Anatolia, his recounting of the sequence might not have been accurate. Well, during these travels, he arrived in Iznik shortly after it had been conquered by Orhan, the Sultan of the nascent Ottoman Empire. In the absence of Orhan, his wife commanded the stationed soldiers. Ibn Battuta spoke very highly of her, noting her piety and excellent hospitality. He described Orhan as one of the greatest Turkmen kings, rich in wealth, lands, and military forces, and almost continuously inspecting his nearly 100 fortresses to ensure their well and constant upkeep. Then to the capital of the Ottoman Beylik, the city of Bursa. Ibn found a vibrant city, expansive bazaars and wide streets, encircled by the most lush and beautiful gardens and flowering springs. His journey also took him to the Beylik of Aydin, where the ruler gifted him a Greek slave, marking the first time he acquired a servant in his travels. This gesture was a conspicuous sign of the wealth and prestige that Ibn had come to command. Later, He would acquire more slaves during his stays in cities like Ephesus, Izmir, and Balikasir. Talk about souvenirs. Well, after departing from Sinope, Ibn chose a maritime route that led him to the Crimean Peninsula, within the territory of the Golden Horde. His initial stop was at the port town of Azov, yes, that Azov, where he met the Emir of the Khan. He then traveled to Majar, a city he described as large and affluent. Leaving there, he sought an audience with Uzbek Khan's traveling court, which at the time was stationed near Mount Beshtal. He then continued northward towards Bulgar, marking the northernmost point of his travels, where he observed the short summer nights that were striking contrast to the subtropical regions he was used to. It's not so strange, though. Here's a fact about me. I have never seen snow in my entire life. Ever. But that's not really relevant, isn't it? In Bulgar, Ibn expressed a curiosity about venturing further north into what he referred to as the Land of Darkness, a region in northern Siberia, perpetually covered in snow, where the only mode of transport was dog-drawn sleds. Certainly a long way from home, long way indeed. Now he described a unique method of trade between the southern merchants and elusive inhabitants of this land. Goods were left in an open snowfield overnight, and by morning traders would find their items replaced with valuable fur skins, without ever even seeing the traders who took the goods. Despite the intrigue, Ibn decided against traveling to this remote land, seeing no personal advantage in it, as he was not a merchant, and there wasn't many Islamic holy sites to see in northern Siberia. Now Ibn's journey then took him back to the Khan's court, which had relocated once more to Astrakhan. It was here that he learned of Ozbek Khan granting permission for one of his pregnant wives, Princess Bayolun, daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Andronikos III Palaiologos, to return to Constantinople for childbirth. Seizing this opportunity, Ibn managed to join the expedition to Constantinople, stepping beyond the Islamic world for the first time. Arriving in Constantinople around the end of 1334, he met the Emperor Andronikos III Palaiologos. During his stay, he visited the renowned Hagia Sophia and engaged in discussions about his travels with an Eastern Orthodox priest, sharing insights from his time in Jerusalem. After spending a month in Constantinople, he returned to Astrakhan and traveled to the capital, Sarai al-Jadid, where he reported his travel accounts to Sultan Ozbek Khan, who was reportedly extremely interested to hear them all. Continuing his extensive journey, he passed the Caspian and Aral seas to reach Bukhara and Samarkand, the latter of which he acclaimed as one of the grandest and finest cities, and the most perfect of them. He noted the dilapidated state of the city walls, however, a lingering result of the Mongol invasion and subsequent conflicts. From Samarkand, he ventured southward to Afghanistan, crossing the daunting mountain passes of the Hindu Kush into India. During this crossing, he reflected on the treacherous condition of the Hindu Kush, known as the Hindu Slayer, due to the numerous slaves from India who perished there from the extreme cold. It's more about the elevation in the Kush. Now, on September 12, 1333, he finally reached the Indus River, marking his entry into the subcontinent. His travels soon led him to the city of Delhi, where he made the acquaintance of the Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq. This Sultan, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, renowned for his wealth within the Muslim world, was a patron of scholars, Sufis, Qadis, viziers, and other key functionaries to strengthen his rule. Utilizing his extensive education from Mecca, Ibn secured an appointment as a Qadi, or judge if you remember, in the Sultan's court. However, he soon discovered the challenge of applying Islamic law beyond the confines of the Delhi court, where Islamic principles held quite limited sway. The exact route that Ibn used to enter the Indian subcontinent is a little bit unclear, but we do know that during his passage he was captured and robbed by rebels. Can't all be safe journeys, right? He likely did cross into India via the Khyber Pass and Peshawar, which is known for its safety, or perhaps a more southern path, and eventually crossed the Sutlej River near Pakpatan. There he visited the shrine of Baba Farid before entering Rajput territory. He described Hansi, which he visited next, as a beautifully constructed and densely populated city, originally founded by a prominent non-Muslim king named Tara. In Sindh, he noted the presence of the Indian rhinoceros along the banks of the Indus. His time in Delhi was marked by these fluctuations in fortune, oscillating between privileged status and even accusations of treason, a reflection of Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq's erratic disposition. A planned departure for another Hajj was thwarted by the Sultan, but in 1341 an opportunity arose with the arrival of an embassy from China, seeking permission to rebuild a Buddhist temple in the Himalayas. Appointed to lead the embassy, Ibn's journey was marred by this attack from bandits again, which he was kidnapped and nearly killed. Despite these adversities, he managed to reunite with his group within 10 days and continued to combat before sailing to Calicut on the Malabar coast. Here, he had the opportunity to stay as a guest of the local ruler, the Zamorin. During a mosque visit, a storm caused the loss of one of his ships, and the other departed without him, later captured by a Sumatran king. Reluctant to return to Delhi and be deemed a failure, Ibn sought refuge in the southern region of India under Jamal-ud-Din, ruler of the Nawayth Sultanate. After the fall of this sultanate, he left for the Maldives, where he was coerced into an extended stay. Appointed as the chief judge, his enforcement of stringent Muslim laws, such as public punishments for missing prayers and dress codes for women, eventually led to political friction. During his tenure in the Maldives, Ibn married into the local royalty and took multiple wives, consistent with his practices of marrying in the regions he visited. After resigning as chief Qadi, possibly under duress, he continued on to Sri Lanka, at the time named Ceylon, visiting sacred sites before returning to the Maldives. His subsequent attempt to travel to China was interrupted by shipwreck and piracy, but he did eventually make his way to the Madurai Sultanate, and from Madurai he resumed his journey to the east, reaching Chittagong, where he planned to meet the revered Sufi saint Shah Jalal in Sylhet. After a month-long trek, he described Shah Jalal as a revered figure, living ascetically alone in a cave, and he was consulted by many for guidance, kind of like an oracle or a wise old man out there on the far reaches of society. After this meeting, he redirected north to Assam, then circled back to continue his journey toward China, adhering to his role as an ambassador. In 1345, he embarked on a remarkable voyage to the Sumudra Pasai Sultanate, which is located in what is now Aceh, northern Sumatra. That's Indonesia, by the way. After a 40-day journey from Sunur Kawan, he noted in his travel log that the region was governed by Sultan al-Malik al-Zahir Jamal ad-Din, a devout Muslim who not only diligently performed his religious duties, but also actively campaigned against the animists in the era. Animism is kind of like paganism, you know, worshipping the sun, making little things out of animal bones. Think about that. Of course, that's a drastic and rather disrespectful way to put it, but, well, I'll do a video on animism later on, I suppose. Now, Ibn Battuta highlighted the wealth of Sumatra, mentioning its abundance of commodities like camphor, areca nuts, cloves, and tin. The prevailing Islamic school of thought in Samudra Pasai was that of Imam al-Shafi, similar to what Ibn Battuta had observed among the Mapila Muslims of coastal India. The Sultanate represented the easternmost reach of the Dar al-Islam at the time, as territories further east were not under Muslim rule. Ibn stayed approximately 2 weeks within the wooden walls of the town, as the Sultan's guest, before being provided with supplies and a ship to continue his journey to China. From there, he sailed for 21 days from Samudra Pasai to Mul Jawar, identified as the island of Java, or specifically the Majapahit Java, which was the center of a Hindu empire at the time. This empire, according to Ibn, spanned 2 months of travel distance and ruled over regions including Kakula and Kamara. He noted the militaristic and economic activities of Kakula and Kuala, mentioning war junks. A junk is a boat, by the way, like a ship, warship, used for pirate raiding and toll collection, and the use of elephants for various tasks, possibly crushing people who did not pay their tolls. We don't know. No, his next destination was Kailukani, in the land of the Tawalisi, where he met the local princess, Urduja, known for bravery and opposition to the Yuan dynasty That's the Mongol rule over China, by the way, the Yuan dynasty. Although described as an idolater, Urduja had the ability to write Bismillah in Islamic calligraphy, indicating some familiarity with Islamic culture. The exact locations of Kailakari and Tawalisi are somewhat debatable. The possibilities range from Champa, which is present-day southern Vietnam, to regions in the Philippines, Japan, and back on the island of Java. The historical existence of Urduja and Tawalisi has been questioned by scholars like Sir Henry Yule and William Henry Scott, who consider them to be possibly fictitious. Now, from Kailukari, Ibn finally reached Quanzhou in Fujian province, marking another significant leg in his extensive travels, and finally he had arrived in China. Quanzhou is beautiful, by the way, you should go. In 1345, he arrived in the city, a thriving port in China's Fujian province under the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. He quickly observed the absence of actual olives, despite the city being named Zaitun, meaning olive. He noted the local artist's skill in crafting portraits of newcomers for security purposes, and lauded the area's craftsmen for their exquisite silk and porcelain. Additionally, he was impressed by the local produce, such as plums and watermelons, and also very taken back by the convenience of paper money, which the Chinese had had for quite some time. He detailed the construction of large ships in Quanzhou, and commemorated on Chinese culinary practices, which included consuming frogs, pigs, and dogs, a notable contrast to his dietary experiences elsewhere. Of course, anybody who's went to China will possibly say the same, though it is extremely rare and rather looked down upon to eat dogs in China before you comment. Now, his accounts, however, contain a few inaccuracies, such as misidentifications of the Yellow River and the Grand Canal, a misconception also that porcelain was made from coal. I don't know where he got that idea, but it was certainly a misconception. Now, in Quanzhou, Ibn was warmly welcomed by the local Muslim community, led by a figure possibly identified as a Fanjiang and the Sheikh al-Islam, who welcome him with traditional music and ceremony. This vibrant Muslim enclave featured its own mosques, markets, and hospitals. They were doing pretty well. Quite a vibrant little community inside the city. It was here that he encountered notable Iranians, such as Burhan al-Din of Khazarun and Sharif al-Din from Tibrit, influential figures in the Yuan administration. Of course, the Yuan administration were quite in the habit of employing foreigners for jobs such as this. They weren't thinking it was a strange concept to get the best help, regardless of where people came from. Now, following his time in Quanzhou, he journeyed south to Guangzhou, staying with a wealthy merchant for 2 weeks. He then revisited Quanzhou and traveled to Fuzhou, where he spent time with Zahir al-Din and met other prominent Muslims, including al-Bushri of Ceuta, who later financed gifts for the Emperor Huizong of Yuan. He then went to Hangzhou, and he described it as one of the largest cities he had ever seen, and he was charmed by its scenic lake and lush hills. The lake, of course, he was referring to as West Lake, which is one of the most popular tourist sites in Hangzhou. He noted the city's substantial Muslim quarter and stayed with a family of Egyptian origin. His experiences in Hangzhou were enriched by witnessing the sophisticated craftsmanship of Chinese wooden ships and attending a banquet hosted by the Yuan administrator, where he was entertained by the local conjurers and magicians. Traveling through the Grand Canal, he admired the vibrant life along the waterways, marked by fields, orchards, and elegantly dressed merchants and priests. Upon reaching Beijing, he claimed the title of ambassador from the Delhi Sultanate and was invited to the Yuan imperial court. Well, despite his prestigious welcome, he found that knowledge of the Great Wall among the locals was, unfortunately, elusive, contradicting his belief that it was built by the Quranic figure Dhul Qarnayn to contain Gog and Magog. Well, his journey continued with a return to Fuzhou and Hangzhou, before he finally departed from Quanzhou on a junk back to Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, during this leg of his journey, he was overcharged by the crew. That's right, they ripped him off, and it led to significant financial losses. In 1346, after a considerable period abroad, he decided it was time to go home to Morocco. Beginning his return journey in Quanzhou, he made his way to Kozhikode. Here, he contemplated revisiting Delhi to seek the favor of Muhammad bin Tughlaq once more, but ultimately resolved against it, choosing instead to proceed towards Mecca. As he traveled to Basra, he navigated through the Strait of Hormuz and received news of the death of Abu Sa'id, the last ruler of the Ilkhanate dynasty in Iran. This significant political change was marked by ensuing civil war, as the region descended into chaos between the Iranians and the Mongols. By 1348, he had reached Damascus, intending to follow the path of his first Hajj pilgrimage. It was during this time that he learned of his father's death, and it wasn't a recent death either. He had died 15 years ago. His journey became overshadowed by this somber news, and indeed the somber theme of death. Did you catch the date that I mentioned? 1348. The Black Death began to ravage all of the regions that he visited. He paused in Homs and witnessed the relentless spread of the plague through Syria, Palestine, and Arabia. Reports on devastating death tolls emerged from places like Gaza, and by the time he returned to Damascus in July, the city was suffering greatly, with daily death tolls reaching up to 2,500. His visit to Gaza revealed a depopulated city, a stark testament to the plague's deadly impact. Thus, his travels took him back to Egypt, where he stayed at Abu Sir, and he heard that daily deaths in Cairo had surged to about 1,100. Despite the grim circumstances, he completed another pilgrimage to Mecca, reaffirming his faith amid this widespread suffering. After his Hajj, he finally resolved, that was enough. I'm going back home. nearly 25 years after he first left. Though his journey did include a brief detour to Sardinia. In 1349, he arrived in Tangier via Fez, only to discover the sad news that his mother had passed away just a few months earlier. After a brief stay in Tangier, upon his return to Morocco, Ibn set off in 1350 for the Muslim-controlled territory of Al-Andalus on the Iberian Peninsula. This journey was initially prompted by the threat posed by King Alfonso XI of Castile and Leon, who had planned to attack Gibraltar. Eager to defend the strategic port, he joined a group of Muslims heading to the area. However, upon his arrival, he learned that Alfonso had died from the Black Death, and the threat of invasion had pretty much receded. Consequently, he turned the journey into a general sightseeing tour and decided to make the most of a bad situation, eventually making his way to Granada. Following his time in Al-Andalus, he decided to explore more of Morocco. His travels thus took him to Marrakesh, where he found to be nearly deserted during the recent plague and the relocation of the capital to Fez. In the autumn of 1351, he then left Fez for Sijil Masa, located on the northern edge of the Sahara. It was here he prepared for a significant leg of his journey by purchasing several camels and spending 4 months there. He departed with a caravan in February of 1352, reaching the salt mines of Tagaza after a mere 25 days. Tagaza was indeed notable for its salt buildings, constructed from slabs cut by the slaves of the Masufa tribe, and its role as a commercial center flush with Malian gold. Despite its economic importance, Ibn was unimpressed, noting the prevalence of flies and the poor quality of the water. After a mere 10-day stay in Tagaza, the caravan moved on to the oasis of Tassarahla, where they prepared for the challenging trek across the vast desert to Oulata. Oulata served as the southern terminus of the trans-Saharan trade route and had recently become part of the Malian Empire. The journey across the desert to this city took them 2 months. Continuing southwest, Ibn followed a river he mistakenly thought was the Nile, but it was actually the Niger, leading him to the capital of the Malian Empire. Here he met Mansa Suleiman, the king since 1341. Ibn was reportedly critical of the local customs, particularly the attire of female slaves and the Sultan's daughter, which he found inappropriate for Muslims. He also expressed negative views about the local people's manners and intellect. Not very nice, isn't it? Well, he wasn't going to hang around there for too long. He then traveled overland to Timbuktu, which was then a small city, though it would later grow in importance, of course. During this journey, he encountered a hippopotamus for the first time, noting the local fear and hunting methods for the animal. And, fun fact, out of all the animals in Africa, hippopotamuses kill the most people every single year. That's right, not snakes, not spiders, not lions, hippopotamuses. After a brief stay in Timbuktu, he traveled by canoe down the Niger River to Gao, an important commercial hub. After spending a month there, he joined a large caravan headed for the oasis of Takeda. While crossing the desert, he received command from the Sultan of Morocco to return home. He then set off for Sijil Masa in September 1353, accompanying a caravan that included 600 female slaves, and arrived back in Morocco in the early days of 1354. After his return, he was encouraged by Abu Inan Faris, the Marinid ruler, to document his extensive travels. He then dictated his experiences to Ibn Juzay, a scholar he had met earlier in Granada. The resulting manuscript, translated as a masterpiece to those who contemplate the wonders of cities and the marvels of traveling. I'm not going to try to read the Arabic name, but it's commonly known simply as the Travels, Rihla, and it remains a significant work in Arabic literature. Interestingly, Ibn did not make notes or keep a journal during his 29 years of travel, relying instead on memory and the manuscripts of previous travelers when recounting his journeys to Ibn Juzay. This has led to more than a bit of skepticism regarding the authenticity of his accounts. For example, descriptions of Damascus, Mecca, and Medina closely resemble those from the work of Ibn Jubayr, a traveler who wrote down his account more than 150 years earlier. Additionally, passages describing Palestine closely mirror the accounts of the 13th century traveler Muhammad al-Abdari. Scholars have questioned whether Ibn visited all of the places he described. They suggest that to provide a more comprehensive description of the Muslim world, he might have incorporated a little bit of second-hand information, or simply borrowed from some earlier accounts. The skepticism extends to his supposed travels to places like the Volga River, Yemen, and parts of Anatolia, which some scholars, not all, but some, have said are quite unlikely. There's also contradictions in his accounts, such as his claim about the conversion of the Maldives to Islam by Abul Barakat the Berber, which differs from the Maldivian official history that attributes the conversion to miracles performed by a Tabrizi named Maulana Sheikh Yusuf Shams-ud-Din. Moreover, some of his descriptions of China are thought to be plagiarized from other authors, or perhaps could just be based simply on common knowledge or popular accounts of the time, rather than first-hand experience. In fact, his writings on China share more than a few similarities with those of Marco Polo, leading to further doubts about his presence there. Well, all in all, despite all the controversies, I think we can all agree that his account, the Rihla, the Travels, remain quite a valuable cultural document that offers quite a bit of insight into the 14th century world, capturing details of the places he visited or learned about. It provides a vivid depiction of diverse cultures, though colored by his own cultural perspectives and biases, but hey, we're all human, aren't we? His observations on local customs, especially regarding gender roles and attire, reflect both his personal astonishments and the broader medieval Muslim worldview. His life, after completing the Rihla, is less documented. We know that he served as a judge in Morocco based on his scholarly and travel experience until his death in 1368 or 69. Thus his travels, encompassing some 75,000 miles across the known Islamic world and beyond, make his Rila an indispensable record of the time, despite any questions surrounding its accuracy. Of course, we could perhaps question it a little more to the point where it's completely ruined. But the last thing I want to do is ruin anybody's good time. I would like to thank my top-tier Patreon subscribers, members, whatever we call them. Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, and Susan. Thank you dearly for supporting the channel. If you would like to do so, then I don't have to explain to you what to do. Look in the description, you'll find the link. But until next time, allow me to thank you again for listening, and I will see you in the next exciting lecture. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.